Good morning. Glad to see you all with me for our day text as we continue readings in Genesis. Today, as you can tell from the reading description, I put the text in the section below. We're going to be talking about a little bit different kind of day. That is the type of day that is called day in these days of creation. So far, we've talked about 3 of them, and none of them give any indication that there is something having to do with a fixed period or schedule. Today, as you can tell, I may have had the sound a little bit off there for a second, but I got it corrected. So either way, as I was saying, we've been talking about the 3 days so far that do not involve a clear or explicit schedule of light and day for a fixed period of time based around the luminaries like the sun, moon, and stars that we use today. So with that in mind, let's get right to the reading, because we're gonna do the reading. We're gonna find out what's going on, what takes place, and why it's different from the 3 prior days. And then I'm going to share a couple articles with you. We'll read a few sections together, get some information to support and further explain and expound upon what we read in the text. Okay, and I find it just amazing in terms of how it describes, and even to this point has described things such as the seas over the earth, and it being dark, and there being no form or structure, it not being completed yet. Then the expanse being made, which creates a separation of the waters on the earth and above the expanse. The expanse being the entire atmosphere, which goes all the way up in terms of the atmosphere to our exosphere, and which structurally contains all of the component parts atmospherically to allow for the clouds to elevate and remain over broad areas and contain millions of pounds of water. And so, according to the text we've read today, the water that existed back in the time that Genesis is describing, in the earlier days and to this point, is thicker. It is a more dense layer of cloud water. Because later on the Bible describes what we can also show geologically and historically took place, and that is that waters from above came down and flooded the earth. And now we see areas in the earth that are ice capped, and we have water under the earth that we'll talk about in future videos that pertain to the flood, that shows the amount of water we have on the surface, underneath, and in ice caps is amazingly vast. Combined with the water that's also still above our heads, it fits perfectly with what the Bible describes. So there would have been no reason for them to describe it in these ways, in my view. That is, to have this kind of separation with waters above and below that then leads to a historically verifiable event such as a global flood. I guess they could have made it up after an event like a flood occurred, and they just went back and wrote all these texts and somehow came up with the view that the atmosphere, the expanse, creates a separation between the waters above and below it, and that water above it came down along with the water under the earth, which somehow they also knew about. We'll get to that, Genesis chapter 7. So I just don't see these things as accidents. But you're going to see that other people do when we read an article in a moment. Nevertheless, the descriptions given here to me seem accurate. I don't see any flaw. I don't see anything in them that would tell me these people didn't know what they were talking about, or who conveyed and who wrote down this information. Because in our view, and as supported by almost every ancient culture, there was a time when higher beings, spirits, sons of God, the Bible calls them, were interacting with humankind. And even the god Jah interacted directly with humans like Adam and Eve, and likely. And after that, right, he even approached Cain, told him not to kill Abel. He did it anyway. So Jah then continued to punish humans as we made bad choices, because we weren't made to make bad choices, and so the consequences had to come to limit our destructive capacity. And look at what we have today. So Jah knows. He knows how to measure the behavior of his creations in ways that allow for his creations to remain. But for those who choose to do bad things to go, we got to go until we get it right or come back the right way when things are made right. But at this time, that's how they were made right. And that's why every time, each day, it says God saw it was a good thing. And the way he's talking here, saying for things to occur, looking at them as they're done, when I think about it, and since God's already made the heavens and the earth, in a Christian sense, it seems to me that others are doing this work in response to God, that they're making the things out of the things he created, just like we see described in relation to his firstborn son. But we know the other sons were also here, at least applauding, probably doing various things at the direction of the Son, whom many believe to be the archangel. He certainly has his angels according to the Bible. So I'm giving you just a little bit of a spiritual context in terms of our Christian view, or some Christian view. But because we are talking about God, right? We are reading about God. We're not going to disassume God just because the text is scientifically verifiable. You see, science today has become this thing that's absent God. You can't have God as the active agent or designer and then use science as a means of verifying that obviously everything's designed and put in place by someone. Well, but that's what we do. We don't do the opposite, which is verifiably untrue, and that is that everything's an accident. So we go with what we can show, and that is scientifically, life only comes from light. It therefore must be eternal. And we believe the marks of life show its intelligence, including these texts. Well, let's talk about them. So Genesis 1:14 through 19. I'm going to read the Hebrew, the translation of the Hebrew, and then the translation of the Greek. And then we'll talk about it. And then I'm going to share a few articles and points with you and look at your questions, of course. You're welcome to comment. Let's take a look. We're going to talk about the light sources, the lights. But we know that there's already light, right? Because God's calling light day. So he's generating light, or has created light in the sense that we see light today, and that is he's allowing for the impact of photons into the firm expanse of the earthly atmosphere, at least, and probably more. But we're talking about a time when no humans were there to see it. So we'll just relate it to the earth and what's happening on it. And so at a minimum, we know that sky heavens has been lit up, at least as far as a day and night. But we don't have the luminaries in the heavens creating the rotational cycles. Not that we can discern, right? Because they're not here yet. But in this text, in today's reading, here they are. Let's see. Verse 14, then God began to say, Hebrew text, a light source must come into being in the firm expanse of the sky heavens in order to divide an interval between the day and the night. So light sources in the sky heavens came into being for signs, for fixed periods, and for days, and for years. Verse 14, translation of the Greek, then God said, there must come to be sources of light in the firm expanse of the sky heavens for illumination of the earth, according to the division between the day and the night. They must be for signs and for fixed periods and for days and for years. So let's stop just briefly for a moment here and notice it says, we've talked about previously the firm expanse and how that includes everything all the way up, space, all of it. There is just a division today, and even more so at this time, between the waters on the earth and the waters above the expanse that's above the earth, right? There's in other words, there's a separation, just like the Bible said in our reading about the firm expanse, a separation came to be, so that there were waters above the expanse, atmosphere, and below it. But the expanse is, again, the whole thing, all the way up into space. That's just referring to that part of it in terms of the waters above and below it. Here it does not say, for example, that the light sources are in the expanse between the waters, right? No. Does it say that the light sources are in the separation between the waters? No. Let's see what else it has to say. Verse 15, Hebrew translation. Then light sources came into being in the firm expanse of the sky heavens, in order to shine upon the earth. So it came about, just like that. Verse 15, Greek translation. They must be for illumination in the firm expanse of sky heavens, in order to shine upon the earth. So it came about, just like that. Verse 16, Hebrew translation. God began to make two primary light sources. The great light source to rule during the day, and the lesser light source to rule the night, together with the stars. Verse 16, Greek translation. Then God made the two main sources of light, the greater light source for the beginnings of day, and the lesser light source for the beginnings of night, and the stars. Verse 17, Hebrew translation. Then God set these sources of light in the firm expanse of the sky heavens. Remember this part, and of course all of it, but we're going to focus on this part and some of the earlier descriptions. But the part here where it says God set, or in the Greek translation, God placed, we're going to focus on that. Verse 17 again. Then God set these sources of light in the firm expanse of the sky heavens, for them to shine light upon the earth. Verse 17, Greek translation. And God placed these sources of light in the firm expanse of the sky heavens, in order to shine light upon the earth. Verse 18, Hebrew translation. And for them to rule during the day and during the night, and to divide an interval between the light and the darkness. God saw all of this was a good thing. Verse 18, Greek translation. And to begin the day and the night, and to divide between the light and the darkness. Then God saw that all of this was good. Verse 19, our last text, and then we'll talk about it. Verse 19, Hebrew translation. Then there came to be a time for darkness and a time for light. This time for light was the fourth day. So there came to be a time for darkness and a time for light. A Greek translation. This time of light was a fourth day. Okay. Finally. Not that, it had to be here, because it is where it should be, and that is right here. The fourth day. This is the day in which Jah created the sources of light in the firm expanse of sky heavens to shine light upon the earth for a reason, for a purpose. In other words, he already had made light, either from himself or through photons sent throughout the universe that would be the same way that these sources of illumination give us light, either as sending photons or reflecting the photons that ultimately hit the atmospheric part of our sky heavens. We'll go back to that. But notice the purpose, the reason why we're going from light on its own, or coming from Jah, or as he has sent it out in the universe apart from sources on their own. The reason why we're going from that to this, to these sources, verse 14, they must be for signs and fixed periods, and for days and for years. Both of them say basically the same thing. So there's a reason why these sources of light are here and they're doing what they're doing. They're creating a division between the light and the darkness according to various signs, fixed periods, days, and years. The exact same things we actually use them for. That's because that's what they were made for. We're using them for that reason because that's what they do. They do it so well that we can chart our courses, we can plan our days, we can look backwards, we can look forwards to events that took place or that will take place or that we hope or praise God will take place. That we plan is what I'm saying. We plan because of these things. We plan because we have fixed periods, days, years, even signs like eclipses we're going to get to in a moment. But on this fourth day, we have the sources of light created to give light apart from the means of light being given on the first through the third day, or on the second and third day, whatever day that Josh sent out the light apart from these sources in prior readings. Now we have independent sources of light that are doing the same thing for the purpose of these fixed periods, days, and years. So we didn't have that before. These signs, fixed periods, days, they weren't there before according to the light that was being given. And that's why I said in prior videos, in our prior Genesis 1 readings that, excuse me, it's hard to say what the condition of the earth, what rotation, if any, or if it was just a place being acted upon in a direct sense without anything taking place yet. We didn't have the expanse. So again, it was the heavens and the earth being dark, covered in water, a wind of God, very similar to how we see other planets when they're illuminated, right? Because like we read earlier, even planets close to the sun like Mercury, they're really not that bright. We have to use special cameras to see them because it doesn't have an atmosphere. It doesn't have an atmosphere that photons from the sun, when they hit it, light it up. We do here. We have the atmosphere that allows for what? Waters to exist above waters. So Jah gave us those conditions, or in our view, according to these texts, made them that way, created the expanse and the heavens we have, the heavens with the waters above and below, and where birds can fly, whereas other planets don't. And so it doesn't matter if they have things like the sun nearby. They don't have the rest of the things needed for the sun and moon to rule the day and night. We do. Our earth is specifically set up and designed with an atmosphere that allows for us to see light. Let's go back over some of the things we've talked about before, and I'll just share a few brief articles that'll highlight this point, because we've talked about it, but it will tie in here very well because we're dealing with the creation of the two light sources, right? So what are they exactly, and how does light work, and why is our planet lit up in the way that it is, and whereas other planets like Mercury are not? So here's an article from April 2013, but it has useful information, so that there's a number of articles that have this information, but I picked this one, and I'll put a link below. And I think in a prior video, I may have said that it takes about 8 seconds for light from the sun to reach the earth, or photons, but it's really 8 minutes is what I meant. And that it'll be mentioned here again. So it asks, how long does it take for sunlight to reach the earth? This sounds like a strange question, right? Because we always think about light coming from the sun directly, and it travels at the speed of light. So it says photons are emitted from the surface of the sun, and they need to travel across the vacuum of space to reach our eyes. We talked about this before, but again, it ties in even more so here. And so the short answer is it takes about 8 minutes, 20 seconds. So this question kind of gets to the information I want to share in terms of what light is. And so I want to get to that, but I wanted to introduce it in terms of the question, some of the basic facts. So here it says, the story of light gets even more interesting when you think about the journey light needs to make inside the sun. It talks about the fusion reactions. And then it says, what you probably don't know is that these photons striking your eyeballs, okay, it talks about them being created thousands of years ago in the fusion reaction of the sun, and then gradually, working their way to the surface and then going on that 8-minute journey that we referenced earlier. Okay, and so it says, that's what I said. Once they escape the surface of the sun, it's about an 8-minute journey to cross the distance of space from the sun to the earth. Okay, so the light you see from your computer is just, real quick. But the light we're getting from the sun isn't that fast. And so that's the basic part, that the photons striking our eyeballs, that's the light that we're actually, when the photons hit the atmosphere, really. I think I wanted to share this article just to point out that part where the photons emitted from the sun, they need to travel across the sun. It takes about 8 minutes to hit our atmosphere, and then we can see them. So let's talk about the light that comes from the moon. Why does the moon shine then, right? Is the moon emitting photons? No. But the moon is reflecting photons. Here's an article from 2014. I'll put the link below. And let me get to the key part. So it says the moon shines because its surface reflects light from the sun. So that's why the moon's brightness is different, because the perceived brightness of the moon from the earth depends on where the moon is in the orbit around the planet. And then, of course, where it is when the photons from the sun hits it. So let me just get to the part where it talks about, so that's essentially what I wanted to share there. I'll put these articles below. I don't want to read them entirely. I'll share a couple more, but photons from the sun are emitted, go through an 8-minute process, traveling through the vacuum of space. They hit our Earth's atmosphere, and that's what creates light. So whereas prior to the two sources of light in the stars that Genesis describes in our reading, whereas photons were hitting the atmosphere from another source that Jah had created. And there are photons, there is an electromagnetic spectrum throughout the universe. But the way in which he created it and used it in the beginning, we're just told that he made light, but had not yet made the light sources that generate these photons. You see, so anything that would have been generating the same things that the sun generates or that stars generate would be creating light. And so with the moon placed near the earth so that the photons from the sun hit it, they bounce off and they'll then go through another journey that allow us to see the moon is bright. So, and then it says at any given point in the moon's trajectory around the earth, only half of its surface is facing the sun, and therefore only half of the moon is lit up. The other half of the surface faces away from the sun and is in shadow. So again, that's just accenting the point we just made, that as far as the reason why the moon is lit up. It's not in itself giving off or generating these photons, but because it can reflect it, because the surface of the moon reflects it, half of it does. It is a source of light during the night, which in the spherical universe in which we resist, in terms of the planets, the stars, the rotation, the cycles that we read about here and that we actually use every day, well, it's perfect, right? Because it allows for that night and day sharing to take place. It creates a perfect division. It gives just enough light during the day and the night, not to be too bright, and to allow us to see sufficiently according to what we should be doing, right? Sleeping at night, working during the day. That's just what Jesus taught. Although we sometimes may have to do one or the other and for different reasons. The point is we're made to work and live during the day and sleep at night. But we still have enough night light from the moon and the stars so that we can be active if we need to be. But the generation of light from the photons from the sun that reflect off the moon or that hit us directly from the sun and that hit our atmosphere allow us to see light. So they are sources of light, just like the text said. Our reading today stated that Jah made two sources of light. God made two primary sources of light, three if you count the stars in terms of a category, because they both texts, Greek and Hebrew, referred to the sun, moon, and stars. And so it calls the greater light the one ruling during the day, and obviously we can see the sense in which that's intended. That is the type of light. And the lesser light source to rule the night. It obviously does not give off the same level of light. It's not reflecting as much photons for us to see as light as the sun does when the sun is shining upon us. Either at the same time as the moon, right? Sometimes we see the moon, but the sun's in the sky too. Because the light from the sun, the amount of photons coming from it is greater than those reflecting off the moon. And so either way, we're seeing them because of the sky heavens that Jah made to separate the waters. He put the two primary sources of light in the firm expanse. It does not say that they're in the separation between the waters. Sometimes it seems like people seem to think that. It does not say that. It just says they're in the firm expanse of sky heavens. And we're also told there's a division between the waters in sky heavens. Exactly like we see today, although as I discussed before, more. That is in terms of the water. We'll talk about that more later. But back to the sun and the moon and the things that they do. So we know they're for fixed periods, days, years, and what else did it say? Signs. Okay, well, we use eclipses and things, and historically people have used them as signs. They're very unusual in the sense that we have two bodies that can intertwine or intersect in ways that allow us to see different shapes, or they blot each other out entirely because of the distance between each other and their respective diameters. Let's take a look. So here's an article, Solar Eclipses wins the next one. I'll put a link below, July 1st this year. So it talks about a solar eclipse occurs when the moon gets between the earth and the sun and the moon casts a shadow over the earth. All right, so let's get to the details on why this happens. There's a lot of information here. You can read it on their own. But notice this here, total solar eclipses. These are a happy accident of nature. You have to keep this in mind when you study these articles and read these things. A lot of these people who write factual information that will follow what she was just read here, these are a happy accident of nature. That's not a fact, right? A happy accident of nature. Can we factually go point to something that shows a solar eclipse is a happy accident of nature? This is an assumption, right? That's put right at the front of a paragraph that introduces data that absolutely points in the direction opposite of what the opening statement just concluded. So here you have this idiot retard conclusion with no evidence, right? This is why I call them retards. They're retarding not just everybody else, they've retarded themselves right at the start of this paragraph. The opening words are an assumption with zero evidence. What evidence shows an eclipse is an accident? I'll show, based on the information that's just about to be given, it's not an accident. And don't they really mean everything is a happy accident of nature, right? They don't mean anything is designed. Not the sun, not the moon, not eclipses, not the stars, not the earth, not the sky heavens, not you and I, not all the plants, not all the trees, not any of the seeds. I haven't even mentioned the animals yet. They're all accidents, according to these guys. Oh, man. Don't buy into it. You need to understand. It's just like sometimes we get with the apologetic nuts on the theological side. They'll say something so dumb and then use it to support a false teaching like, the Trinity, the metaphysic of the Trinity. We all believe the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit in terms of what is taught in the Bible. But the Trinitarians create a metaphysic that's an assumption not from the biblical text. There is no biblical text that in any way describes a Trinitarian metaphysic the way they require us to believe in order to be accepted. All right, well, they would require any accepted scientist to believe these are all happy accidents. We'll get to why that's not true in just a second, but let me finish up since I brought up the apologetic nuts. All right, they'll introduce a text and then say it teaches just the opposite. You could show them Jesus say the Father's greater than I. John 14:28. No qualification, right? None. What would they say? That's his human nature. Oh, really? So he has two natures. One's greater. One the Father's greater than, and one the Father's equal to? Yeah, that's right. Oh, because he doesn't say that. You see what I'm saying? They'll create an assumption, precede the text. Text means something else, no matter what it actually says. Same thing with these scientific nuts. They do not follow their own information or data many times. There's some good ones. I'm not saying all of them. But the way they look at us, theists and people who believe in intelligent design, when they're the nuts and they make statements like this, the happy accident of nature. Okay, let's read about that. The sun's 864,000 mile diameter is fully 400 times greater than that of our puny moon, which measures just about 2,160 miles. But the moon also happens, it just happens, to be about 400 times closer to Earth than the sun. The ratio varies as both orbits are elliptical, meaning they go through this kind of movement around each other, but they basically stay the same. Don't believe people that tell you the moon's falling out of orbit and all this stuff. Jah keeps them in place. They wouldn't even be in place unless what? According to the text we read today, he set them in place. Verse 17. Back to these facts that are just a happy accident. Just happens to be 400 times closer, and as a result, when the orbital planes intersect and the distance aligns favorably, the new moon can appear to completely blot out the disk of the sun. On the average, a total eclipse occurs somewhere on Earth about every 18 months. So, I mean, it says during the brief period of totality when the sun is completely covered, the beautiful corona, the tenuous outer atmosphere of the sun is revealed. Totality may last as long as 7 minutes, 31 seconds, though most total eclipses are usually much shorter. So special things occur in ways that are unique, that have always, and even today, are used as signs, indications, change, new periods, different cycles. If you go to, for example, this site here, I'll put a link below, Mr. Eclipse. This guy's great, at least in terms of the photos. I refer to these sites in terms of the data, but as you can see, this article right here, right at the gate, these are a happy accident of nature. You can't believe everything you read in these things. Look for the facts. Here, facts right here, retarded assumption right there. And just set that aside. Make sure you remember the facts. Let them believe what they want. Okay. Mr. Eclipse, that's an actual photo right there. He's got so many great photos. I wanted to show them to you. I highly recommend you take a look at the site, peruse his photos. He uses, as he says here, the following images capture the partial phases and totality as shot, no processing. They were shot with a Nikon D850 and a Vixen 90mm fluorite refractor, 90mm f9. There's the details. Thousand Oaks glass filter was used for the partial phases. So, I mean, these are real shots that show these different moon phases. Look at the brilliance. Look at the contrast. Got the golden crescents and different shapes. The black moon, sun radiating around it. Then you've got the new moon shining out with all this outer corona light, or photons, things we see as light, right? Here's total eclipse, diamond ring effect. Following 6 images capture the diamond ring from both before and after totality. They were shot using Nikon D7200 and the Sigma 170 500mm APO aspherical lens at 500 millimeters. Let's check it out. I mean, this stuff is beautiful. There are tons of them. Look at just how beautiful, precise. Look at the whole website dedicated to them, the way we track them. Historically, if you look up the impact eclipses have had on men, humankind, I mean, there's no question that these things have served as lights or sources of lights, right? Things that either give off photons that reflect off the moon or hit our atmosphere directly and allow us to see light in the expanse, and that also serve as signs like this. There's tons of them. You got to go to this site and see all the images he's collected. It will blow your mind. When you just eclipses, you do this with anything, a molecule, a cell, a plant, an animal, a human. It'll blow your mind. You know why it's going to blow your mind when you look at these things? Because we are not a happy accident of nature. We were made just right. We were made exactly the way the account in Genesis has been describing. From the creation of the heavens and the earth, to the creation of sky heavens, to the separation of the waters above and below, to the creation of light and the contrast between light and dark, to the separation or stripping away of waters, or they're likely going underneath the ground because that's where the springs of water reside. We'll talk about when we get to the flood. So that land could appear, and trees and plants and seeds could be seen, could grow and produce fruit, and all these things. And he made sources of light in sky heavens that serve as a source of the things that when they hit our atmosphere allow us to see, or when they reflect off the moon when we're supposed to be sleeping or doing less activity so that it's not as bright or brilliant. That's why it says it rules the night. It's a lesser light. It's a source of light. Why? Because the photons are hitting it and reflecting off of it. They're coming from the moon. They're coming from the sun and other sources of electromagnetic radiation or photons, but they're hitting the moon when we see it as light during the night, at least in terms of it being the lesser light that rules the night. So when you share Genesis with other people, you should not hesitate to say these things were created, designed, exactly like we make things today. Because even the things we make today don't work this way. They just work kind of like them. Because we follow the one who made all these things. We're just not as good as he is. Because we're the thing made. He's making them. And we get to behold and benefit and marvel at them. Some people don't, though. Some people say, that's just an accident of nature right there. In fact, that's not just an accident of nature right there. It's an accident of nature everywhere. Yeah, they call it a happy one to make you feel a little better about it. And there's no accidents anywhere. Even an accident, right? An accident, unless you describe it as something you didn't intend, that's an accident. But accidents always happen for a reason, right? Even the accidents you don't intend. They happen because you didn't do something right, or someone else didn't. Something didn't happen right. If it's an accident, something that you meant to happen a different way, or that should have happened a different way, but for something that didn't happen right. These are all right. Light is right. The sky heavens is right. The sun and moon reflect and send off the light. That's right. How can an accident be right? How can an accident be right not just one time? Solar eclipse. How could it be right to even get to the eclipse? How could you have an accident get us to the eclipse? Let alone have an eclipse be an accident, given what we know about where the sun is, where the moon is, and how they orbit, and what it would take to perfectly blot each other out in the ways that they do. How could we even get to that point based on what we've read to this, to our readings to this extent so far, and what we know would have had to have been the case? None of this stuff could happen accidentally. It never happens accidentally. Yet we're supposed to believe that an eclipse and everything that led to it and everything that followed it until we started doing things intentionally was an accident? I don't believe it. I don't see any evidence for it. And that's why, even though they say it, the rest of everything else they say shows the opposite. So I'm going to put these links below because I trust you. I trust that you, like me, even though we want to believe the things we see and read, and we trust other people to tell us the truth, they just don't always do. Or they just don't always sometimes know what to believe themselves, and they think, well, yeah, all this stuff is amazing. It sure is amazing. We have an eclipse and all these things. It's a happy accident. It's sure a happy accident. I'm here to bear witness and help you to do the same, to help these people not become unhappy, but to understand that their happiness can remain without having to believe in the worst possible conclusion. And that is one with no evidence that says we're just an accident, rather than someone's consequence, someone who intended to do things just right, and who, after he made things like the light that are right and all the other things that we've seen him make to this point, he says what? That was a good thing.